I'm really honored to be here. I'm really honored to be, I told you guys last week, out of this church and to be a part of this family. And I in no way underestimate the blessing that is. As my dad just said, I just spent 16 months living in Thailand. Most of you read my newsletters and have emailed me and kept up and able to keep up with prayer requests, but I wanted to just share a few highlights with you before we really get into the word, of ways that the Lord moved in really big ways in lives he's been touching. Richard, can you put up the first picture? This is my friend Bong there with the guitar. Bong is Thai Chinese. A lot of Thai people are actually Chinese. And he's 28 years old, and I'd like to say I'd take a bullet for him. And the Lord has begun to move in this young man's heart. And you know those people who, when they get saved, the world radically change and things shift in the spiritual atmosphere? That is this young man. And we became friends the first month I was there. And he began to talk to me about the brokenness that Buddhism had led him to. He was sick of the emptiness. They didn't have the answers. It was just continual chasing and chasing and chasing. You're trying to earn merit. And he was really not buying into it. And the Lord just began to really reveal himself, and the Holy Spirit began to reveal himself to Bong. And he came to church with me every Sunday at 9 a.m. Church starts at 9 a.m. where I went in Thailand, and he would be there, and he would be like, half asleep and like really struggling. He sleeps into like 11 a.m. every day, but he was there every Sunday. And he began to ask questions, and we began to talk about, Thailand, this shame-based culture. And we began to talk about there's no condemnation in this God, and the one true God, his word tells us there's no condemnation here. And he said to me, I think that your Jesus is different than the other Jesus I heard about. I've heard about your Jesus, this Christian Jesus, but they wanted condemnation. He said, I don't understand. And it began to touch his heart. And the Lord is moving in him, and I'm excited. And if you remember to pray for Thailand, I would ask that you remember to pray for Bong, that the Lord would continue to provide believers that would come around him and continue to answer his questions and continue to just be the fragrance of Christ to him, because the Lord is moving in his life. And that means the Lord is moving in his family's life and the people around him and the people who come to his business. And that means the Spirit of God is coming to Thailand in a real way. We could go to the next picture. This is Modem. Most of you know I worked at a community center with kids and teenagers. I was mainly with the teenagers, and Modem here on the left side, he's 14. Mom left when he was about 8. He has a younger brother and an older sister. His dad owns a little tailor shop and, doesn't make enough for them to get by. So they come to the community center and they get meals, and they are on scholarships for school with us. He dropped out of school by age 12 because of the hopelessness in his home and in the village where he lives. And he talked to the people where I work, the Thai staff, and he said, there's no point. Why keep going to school? I'm not going to be able to get a job. I'm not going to be able to. There's just no point. And the hopelessness and despair that we can see in this young man's life is something so real and tangible in the spiritual atmosphere of Thailand. Thailand is I've talked to some of you, it's one of the most missionized countries in the world, and yet has one of the smallest amount of Christians. So that doesn't add up. Something's wrong. And the spiritual holds on this land and on these people are so real and so tangible, and we can see it here. A hopelessness for a 12-year-old to just drop out of school and sit at home all day. How devastating. He stopped coming to the community center because he was too embarrassed. Within my first few months there, he came back. I had not met him when he dropped out. He came in, and that's when I got to hear his story. And he came in 2 years after dropping out of school because he couldn't handle the brokenness anymore. He'd come to his breaking point. And he knew what the community center was about, and he knew that we preached Jesus. And he came, And he's so intelligent. So he's dropped out of school and he's helping all the other kids with their homework. And he wants to learn English. And he's trying and he's studying. And I remember talking to my Thai language teacher, my tutor, about him because I just love him so much. And I want to see good in his life and I want to see him serve Jesus and the blessings of God in his life. And my Thai teacher said, you just have to keep praying and you have to keep encouraging him. And so you all know, you've all seen me with kids. Most of you have seen me with kids. Every day I'm there with Modem, and I'm like, you are a rock star. Like, I am just his biggest cheerleader, and he thinks I'm a lunatic half the time. But I want him, whether he thinks I'm crazy or not, someday he's going to remember that this little white girl believed in me. This little white girl believed that Jesus could renew my mind, could change my heart, could do something radical in my village. And so that was a priority to me. A couple months before I left, I got to see the transformation in Modem as he has begun to walk with Jesus, as he has begun to say, I don't want to live in this brokenness. I don't want to keep chasing what Buddhism is telling me and leading me to nothing. I want to follow the one true God. And if that means going back to school, if that means whatever it is, I'm here for it. And teenagers are weird and hard and whatever. And during one of the Bible studies, I'm praying to close, and Modem is there on his knees, crying and holding a Bible and another hand out. And it was such evidence to me that Jesus is meeting him, that God is beginning to meet his needs as he cries out. And all the other teenagers are like, oh, well, what's going on with Modem? whatever. They'll have their moment. They'll have their come to Jesus moment. That's okay. But if you remember to pray for Bong and Modem, because it's hard. It's hard being in Thailand. It's hard coming from a Buddhist family. It's hard being 14. And I really believe that the Lord desires to use Modem and continue to move in his life and reveal himself. So I just wanted to share with you some of those people that are really close to my heart and that the Lord has begun to touch. And now I really would like to get into the Word. Something that is hard for me. I'm 24. So sometimes I feel kind of silly. People always ask me, like, oh, what's the Lord teaching you? I'm like, well, you've served the Lord longer than I've been alive. What's the Lord teaching you? But I think the Lord has made it clear to me that when I learn something, it doesn't have to be just for me, just because I'm 24. And so I just want to humbly share with you something that the Lord's been really teaching me. We're going to go to the Old Testament, if that's okay. Genesis 12. And I messaged today Lot in the car, which you'll see why. So if we read Genesis 12, the Lord said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. He doesn't tell him where to go. He says, the land I will show you. That's pretty important. So imagine just getting in your car and you don't know where you're going, but you just got to drive. I'll show you when you need to know. I'm not really sold on that whole idea. All right, verse 2. I will make you into a great nation and I will bless you. I will make your names great and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all people on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram left as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out. The first thing I want to address in this text is the purpose in the blessing. When we look at verse 2 and 3, I will make your name great and you will be a blessing. God is bringing great blessing to Abraham's life, not just frivolously or for the fun of it. Certainly God loves his children and he wants to bless us, absolutely. But I think that there is purpose in the blessing, and it is so much bigger than that. He is giving blessing to us so that he can bless others through us. He wants to renew our minds so that others can have their mind renewed when they sense the fragrance of Christ on us. He wants to strengthen us so others can find strength in our God. He wants to set a revival in our hearts so that a revival can meet this church. He wants to set a fire and let the Spirit of God come and meet us in a supernatural way so that this region can be touched in a supernatural way. There is purpose in the blessing. It is bigger than ourselves. So I'm going to receive my blessing, and I'm going to thank God, and I'm going to praise him, but I'm going to acknowledge this is bigger than me. There is purpose in this blessing. We go back to the text in verse 4. Abram left as the Lord has told him, and Lot went with him. Something catches my attention here. If we look, the translation on the screen is the Holman translation. It says, go out from your land and your relatives. Verse 4. Lot is going with him. If we go to the next slide, if we can. Yeah, verse 1, go out from your land and your relatives. That's pretty clear, your relatives. You know who your relatives are. Verse 4, only 3 verses later, Abraham went, and Lot went with him. Something's not adding up to me. If you don't know, Lot is Abraham's nephew. So I'm pretty sure that's a relative. I'm pretty sure God said, leave your relatives, right? So something isn't really making sense. And that's why I titled today, Lot is in the car. Why is Lot in the car? Why is Lot in the car? Before we go more into why Lot is in the car, I do want to acknowledge Abraham got in the car. It's an issue that Lot's in the car, but he got there. How often is it hard for us to really get the wheels moving? Right? When God tells us something, it can be clear. It can be a call of God on our life. It can be a call to the ministry. How many people do you know have been called to the ministry and dragged their feet for years before they will just surrender? It could be a coworker. It could be somebody to love. How many times do we pray, God, show me how to be a light at my workplace? Show me how to love these people. Show me how to bring your presence to these people. And he says, all right, the woman who sits across from you every day that everybody else calls unlovable, I want you to invest in her. I want you to love her. How often does that happen? Okay, God, show me how, show me how, show me how. What am I supposed to do? Not that. He tells you, but not that. I can't love her. Anyone else. How hard is it for us to really get in the car, get the wheels moving, and begin to act on what God has told us? I think a lot of times that's really hard. So I don't want to discredit Abraham completely. Though Lot is in the car, and that troubles me, he did get in the car, right? Okay. So Lot is in the car because he listened to God. How often do we listen to God, right? I think a lot of times in our mindset, God will answer our prayers, God will give us direction, but if it's not what we want to hear, we a little bit subconsciously dance around it. I don't think we have malice in our heart necessarily, sometimes certainly. I think we have good intentions, but just like I said with work, how do I love people at work? This woman, this specific person, the unlovable. Nope, can't do that one. Try again. And we think if we hold out, maybe the answer will change. Has anyone done that? Because I do that a lot. Okay, God, I hear you, but I'm just going to wait till you change your mind. Right? That seems so much easier. Abraham got in the car, but Lot is in the car, and I am troubled. When we when we struggle to listen to what God is telling us, maybe it's not a call, maybe it's a small plan for right now. Maybe it's a purpose for right now. Maybe it's giving to a specific missionary or ministry or church. Maybe it's fasting for a week. Maybe it's something small. Are we responding to those calls and purposes and plans? Abraham's story in this passage in Genesis 12 begins with a call. And I would argue that it's a pretty important call because Abraham's the father of our faith. He's the patriarch of the Israelites, right? We still sing about him. Father Abraham, right? Had many sons. We all know his songs still. But when we look at Abraham's call in his context, if we go back to when Abraham was on earth and we go back to the culture that he was living in, his call is crazy more relevant when we look at the context. During Abraham's life, people were serving many gods, lots of gods. And Abraham is called by the one true God to leave and to serve one God. So he comes home and he says, hey, Dad, I'm headed out. Okay, Abraham, where are you going? I don't know. Not sure. I'll know what I need to know, I guess. Well, who told you to leave? God. Which God? The one true God. It would create quite a predicament in his culture and in his context. Can you imagine? I can't imagine. I can't imagine. In that context, it just doesn't make sense. And what this made me think of is our friends, I don't see them today, the Sri Lankan family. I remember sitting with Abigail and talking to her about when they came to America. They had been living, I think, in Malaysia, somewhere. They left Sri Lanka, they were living somewhere, and were waiting to get processed to the next place. They were called one day, and they said, the government agency, whatever is working with them, said, come to the airport, you're ready to go. They had no idea where they were going to go. No idea. Can you imagine going to the airport counter? What do they ask you when you first get to the airport? Where are you going? So they can look up your ticket. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know where I'm going. I know it's going to be far away. I know the food's going to be different. They're going to speak a different language. It's going to feel nothing like home. No idea, but here I am and I got to go. Our sweet friends didn't have much of a choice, and that was God's blessing in their life to bring them here. But how scary, right? I can empathize with them to go to the airport, not know where you're going. Here Abraham is, and he had a choice. His situation was different. He had a choice. He could go blindly like God told him to, or he could not. He went blindly. I don't know if I could do that, realistically. I'm not sure that I would have the faith. And so it starts to make a little more sense that he is the father of our faith. Have you ever questioned why God doesn't show you the whole picture? We all know that, I just have been talking about Thailand missions. That's where I'm going, right? Thailand, that's where I was. You've watched me grow up. We know that this is where my life is headed. It is the most frustrating thing when the world knows that about your life, but you don't know where you're going to go, right? How frustrating is it when God tells you to move somewhere, you don't know what job you're going to get? Or when you know that the Lord is moving you to buy a house, but it takes you 3 years to find a house? I think that God didn't show Abraham the full picture, and God doesn't show us the full picture for a few reasons, but I think one of them, we can't handle it, right? We want to know all the details now, but whether I feel it or not, it doesn't matter what I'm feeling. I'm going to trust God, right? Even when I'm really frustrated that I don't have the whole picture, I'm going to trust him. He knows what he's doing. I think I've come to that place in my life where I'm like, okay, I don't agree with it, but I'll trust you, right? We're not ready to see the full picture. Could you imagine if when you got in your car and you put in your GPS where you're going, if the GPS told you every turn you're going to make on that route before you pulled out of the driveway? I don't know what you do. Maybe you're more sanctified than me, but I throw the GPS out the window. It's useless to me. That's not going to help me. If I hear all the directions before I leave my driveway, what am I supposed to do with that? God is specific. He's strategic. And it is not by mistake that he doesn't show us the whole picture. When we go back to this text, I find myself stuck on the last 5 words again. And Lot went with him. Why is Lot there? Leave your country, leave your relatives. Abraham has already walked in victory. The fact that his wheels are rolling, he's in the car, he's going. Why is Lot with him? I don't get it. When we take God's commandments as suggestions, we then begin to reap the consequences in our own life. God does not impute the consequence on us, but there is a consequence from our disobedience. When we talk about disobedience, that can get a little messy and people get a little uncomfortable. But I want to give you a picture. When we're talking about disobedience, God is not a principal, he's a parent. So a principal says, don't skip school, don't skip school, you better be in class, don't skip school, you skip school, you're suspended. What does a parent look like? The kid keeps touching the hot stove. Don't touch the stove, don't touch the stove, don't touch the stove. If the child touches the stove, what happens? They get burnt. Does that mean that that parent held that child's hand on the stove? No, no one would say that. Absolutely not. But there is a consequence that takes place. Is that what that parent wanted for that child? Absolutely not. A little more extreme example, so bear with me. If I have a small child and we're outside playing and the ball goes into the street, the child runs into the street and stays in the street because they decide the street is way more fun. As a parent, I immediately say, hey, get out of the street. Bring them back, right? And I explain, we do not play in the street. Probably a little more sternly because they need to understand that's a pretty serious thing, right? A few days later, we're outside playing again, and that child goes in the street again. Well, I've already told them, so now I'm a little more frustrated, and I grab that child again. We don't play in the street. There will be consequences if we play in the street. I told you yesterday, we can play in the grass in our yard. We don't go in the street. A few days later, we're outside, and the child goes in the street, and a car comes and hits the child. As my child is laying on the street, screaming and crying in terror and pain, we would never think that that parent is going to run up to that hurting child and say, I told you this was going to happen. This is your fault. You did this. That, I think we can all agree, that just doesn't make sense, and it's not going to happen. I did tell him, and I may be a little frustrated, but I'm going to pick that child up, and I'm going to take him to the hospital, and I'm going to comfort him, and I'm going to fight to see a doctor as fast as I can, and I'm going to get him the care that he needs, and I'm going to be there as a loving parent. Why do believers do the same thing with God? Why do we say the same thing about the Lord? If I'm in the hospital with my child a week after this accident, they're in a full body cast, it's really a whole thing. And his friends come to see him in the hospital room. And I am outside in the hallway and I hear my son say, I heard my mom tell me not to play in the street, but that was really cruel of her. She should not have sent that car to hit me. Exactly, it's comical. How many times have you heard a believer say that? Why did God let this happen? Why did God send this sickness? Why did God send this hurt? Why did God send this person? Actions have consequences. That may be a hard pill to swallow, right? But that does not mean that God sent the car to hit us. I think that's an important concept for us to really, truly grasp. There may be consequences for our disobedience, but God will always be a merciful God. He will always be a God of restoration. He will always be a forgiving God. So when you choose disobedience, consequences may come that you might not like, but he will still be there, and he will grieve, and he will mourn at the consequence that you have to walk through. He will mourn when you hurt, because that was not his desire for you, but he will still be there. He's not going to hold that against you. He's not going to say, I told you not to run in the street. He's still going to meet you and restore you, and there will always be grace and forgiveness in him. When we continue in this text, we start to see the result of this disobedience. Why is Lot in the car? Leave your country, leave your family. Lot goes with him. Leave your relatives. Lot goes with him. When we look at verse 13:5. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. That's interesting because God is blessing Abram, not Lot. But Lot sure did get to ride off his coattails. Lot was blessed because he was in the presence of Abraham. Side note, who you're surrounding yourself with matters a lot. You will either reap consequence from disobedience from the circle you are in, or you will reap blessing. It matters. Who you surround yourself with matters. All right, now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. In my mind, 2 + 2 is 4. Leave your country, leave your relatives. Why is Lot with you? This blessing is for Abraham, right? That's clear in the text. The land was not meant to sustain Lot and Abraham's assets. So the disobedience led to drama, right? It led to a little bit of chaos. Verse 7, and quarreling arose between Abram's herdsmen and the herdsmen of Lot. The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. Quarreling arose. The Holman translation says conflict broke out. Conflict arose. There was beef. There was issues. There was drama. And it makes sense. Where there is disobedience, there will be drama. When Abraham realizes they can't carry on like this, he goes to Lot. And he says, we can't carry on like this. My disobedience is causing drama, causing conflict. I don't want conflict with you. You are my brother. Let's separate. And Abraham says, you choose, Lot. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. Lot, you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Whatever you want. Which doesn't really make sense to me. Maybe I'm a little hard-hearted, but it's my call. It's my blessing. This is my land God has appointed for me. I'm going to say, I'm going to the left. Abraham, get over there to the right. Or Lot, get over there to the right. Why? Why is Abraham giving Lot the choice? I can give you the Sunday school answer first. To be generous, to be kind. It's a godly thing to do. But when we study this text, it begins to become abundantly clear. Can I have the next slide? Or maybe the slide before this, the 3 names? Okay. Can I have 3? Dad, can you come up? Joe Graziano, can you come up? Do you mind just standing up here really quick? Sure. Okay. Come up here. When we look and we study the family tree of Abraham, we're going to have a much clearer picture. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, right? And then do we have a young... Ian, can you come here? Okay. Haran is the oldest son, and he's Abraham's brother, right? Haran has a son. Ian, come here. Lot. So this is Lot. This is, they match perfect. It was the Lord. Lot is Haran's son, okay? Haran's brother is Nahor. Now the Bible tells us that Nahor got a wife and a family, even with a name like Nahor. Go ahead, you can sit down. You can sit down. Nahor goes to his own house. Yeah, you can sit down. He does his own thing. He's living his life. We have Haran and his son Lot, and we have Abraham. The Bible tells us that Haran passes away. So you can go sit down. Haran dies. So now you're left with Lot, who has no father. And you're left with Abraham. What was the desire of Abraham's heart? To have a son. The desire of Abraham and Sarah. Are you beginning to see? Okay.
Nothing but joy.
So this is Abraham's nephew. And he doesn't have a father. So Abraham can meet his need. And Abraham has a need. All I want is a son. I don't care about the land. What's it worth if I have no one to give it to? What is the money worth? What do I do with it if I don't have a son? That need can be met by Lot, right? Okay, you guys can sit down. Thank you. That begins to make a lot of sense, doesn't it? Leave your relatives, that's one thing. But let's make it personal. Leave your nephew, who you have raised like a son. Leave your nephew, who you have loved and been there through the death of his father, who has fulfilled your need to be a father. It becomes a little bit different. And I begin to have a little more empathy for Abraham. I still don't think he should be in the car, but I understand a little more. I want us to recognize that Abraham's desire for a son is not inherently wrong. Lot's desire for a father in his life is not wrong. But what the devil would love to do is to take a legitimate desire and fulfill it in the wrong way. There's nothing wrong with the desires of your heart, but the way which we fulfill it is crucially important. So you may want to be loved, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to be loved and wanting to find a spouse or wanting to be in a relationship. But if you have to sleep with him for him to tell you what you need to hear and for him to stick around, that connection is illegitimate. It is not what God wants you to be in, and there's going to be consequences in your heart, in your mind, in your life, the chaos that will ensue. The desires of our heart are not inherently wrong. How we fulfill it matters. God is saying behind the scenes, because he doesn't tell Abraham in this text, Lot is not how I want to fulfill your desire. There is a promised child, Jacob, that I want to give to you. Can you get rid of Lot so that I can give you the promise? Can you get rid of Lot so that I can fulfill the desire of your heart in a much more significant way, so that I can make you the father of all nations, so that your descendants will be more than the stars? Abraham has no idea. No idea that that's what God has in store for him. No idea that that is the blessing that God is going to give him. And the blessing can't come. There's no room for it if Lot's in the car. How often do we do that as believers? How often do we do that in our life? Do we hold on to this thing? We'll hold on, and we won't make excuses. We'll just have every explanation, right? We'll hold on because the hurt that comes from letting go, we can't bear it. We can't let this thing go. It might be a job, it might be a relationship, but it certainly doesn't have to be. It may be a job. It may be anxiety and fear. Maybe God is calling you to a promotion, but your anxiety and your fear and your insecurity says, no way, I'm not going for it. I'm not doing it. But you've been praying for the Spirit of God to come to your office and meet these people. Maybe once you take this promotion that God is calling you to, having a boss who serves Jesus is going to be something that unlocks the Spirit of God in that office. But your insecurity and fear is in the car. That's your lot. We got to get rid of Lot. If we go to chapter 13, verse 14, right? So Abraham just said to Lot, you go to the left, you go to the right, I'll do whatever. Abraham humbly gave him the choice, which we understand now because that love and that connection is so deep. Can you imagine what I would do for my nieces if my sister passed away? I would be Abraham. It'd be very hard for me to walk away. We understand, so Abraham says, you make the choice, Lot. So they part ways. What happens as soon as Abraham parts from Lot? Verse 14. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, not when he was thinking about it, not when he said, okay, God, I heard you, but you got to give me 3 more confirmations. After Lot parted from him, the Lord says, lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk through the length of the land, for I am giving it to you. Wow. I think it's pretty powerful when we start to realize the lots in our life. What does it take for us to come to a place of full submission and full surrender and complete obedience and utter abandonment? What does it take for us to get there? Well, if we choose disobedience, it's going to take some drama. There's going to be some drama. Conflict arose between Lot and Abraham. There's going to be conflict. When we come to the place, usually it takes a few conflicts, takes a few rounds of drama, a little bit of disobedience, right? Sometimes we have to really feel it. And then we begin to learn. Listen, Lot, if you want to go left or right, I'll do whatever. You get to make the call. You go left, I'll go right. That's fine. I don't care. but I will no longer allow my disobedience to stand between me and the one true God that I was called out of my land, called from my relatives, called from my country to serve. I will no longer let my disobedience in this relationship stand in between me and my Creator. I will no longer let this behavior and this disobedience create conflict in this land. Sometimes our lot is a relationship. Sometimes it is a person. Like I said, sometimes it is our anxiety that will not let us continue in the decision, in the plan, in the call that God has placed in front of us. I know I haven't lived much life to most of you. And I don't know what your lot is. But I know that the one true God who restores and renews has way more for you. And I do know that your blessing stands on the other side of your obedience. When we kick the lot out of our car, we kick a lot of the drama out. When I begin to walk in full obedience to what He's placed in front of me, whether it's a big call to ministry, whether it's a big call to raise kids instead of the career I planned on, whatever. We're not here to compare because that's just, don't get me started there, but whatever it is, God's calling you to something. If it's to love the unlovable that's at your office, it's important to Him. It's important enough to the Father's heart to place it in front of you and ask that of you. So there's no small or big lots. Either way, it's disobedience. Either way, it will wreak havoc and drama in our lives. But bigger than that, there is so much better. When we let go of these silly little things, sometimes it doesn't feel so silly. Right? This is my nephew. Lot is my nephew that his father has passed away. I need to take care of him. This is my responsibility. How could I ever let him go? What about the desire in my heart for a son and my wife? The brokenness in her heart for a son. Could you imagine if Abraham knew before he left town, if he knew what God had in store for him? Do you think Lot would have been in the car? No. But Abraham had a choice. Without knowing the whole picture, there's a choice. And so I'm just going to close out. I would just ask you what your lot is. What drama is it producing in your life? What ways is it affecting not only you, but the people around you? Sometimes we are hurting. Probably a lot of us sitting here are hurting from someone else's disobedience. Sometimes that's the lot that we have to kick out of the car. Sometimes we have to step away from that person's disobedience. So I would just ask you, if you did a CSI scan of your life and whatever God has put before you, what is the lot in your car? And are you willing to kick it out for the promise and the blessing of God that He has before you? Thank you.